Welcome to East Lansing City Council meeting discussion only for Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. We'll begin with the roll call.
Councilmember Babcock.
Present.
Councilmember Brookover.
Here.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg. Here. Mayor Bacon.
Present. Next, I'll look for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilperson Brookover, second by Councilperson Watson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next up, communication from the audience. If you'd like to communicate, please keep your communications to 5 minutes. And please fill out one of the blue cards to allow us to keep record of the communication.
Do I fill out the blue card after?
You can do it after.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Just state your name for the record.
Yep. My name is Ben Chandler. I'm here on behalf of Decriminalize Nature Mid-Michigan, and I'd like to address the council regarding tonight's discussion about the decriminalization of naturally occurring psychedelic substances known as entheogens. In more ways than one, I'm here in front of you as a consequence of my experiences with psychedelics. I've been hospitalized due to an overdose on prescription drugs, been held tight in the grips of a substance use disorder with seemingly no way out, and prior to my psychedelic experiences, I believed my life would ultimately end by suicide. In the depth of my despair, psychedelics were a lifeline. My experiences gave me the opportunity to clearly witness the full potential I have as a human being and face the struggles I was avoiding with my substance abuse. They taught me how to love and accept myself and nurture the qualities I want to embody without punishing or avoiding the aspects that need work. The depth of pain I endured and immensity of healing I received as a result of my experiences was so profound that it shaped my life. It's why I'm here advocating this policy change, and it's why I'm studying psychology and neuroscience at MSU, so I can one day provide others access to that same transformative healing. But it's not just me. I'd like to remind you that after just 4 hours at the East Lansing Farmers Market last summer, we obtained roughly 50 signed petitions from East Lansing residents requesting that council take action on this issue, which were then mailed to City Council. Our society is desperately in need of evidence-based approaches to these issues rather than basing our policies on fear and punishment. So what does science have to say about this? 2 studies from Johns Hopkins in particular showcase the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. One of them, evaluating the effects of a single experience with psilocybin, reported that 2/3 of participants rated the experience as one of the top 5 most meaningful in their lifetime. This single experience resulted in positive changes in moods, attitudes, and behavior lasting at least 14 months. Another study treated depressed patients with 2 sessions of psilocybin spaced 2 weeks apart. 12 months after the second session, 75% of participants exhibited a clinically significant response, with 58% no longer meeting diagnostic criteria for depression. The clinical data are compelling, but concern may arise about the specific and controlled context of use in these situations, which is very different from that of a typical psychedelic user. Approximately 32 million Americans have used psychedelics in a non-clinical setting, and several studies have looked at the effects of these substances on regular people. One study at Yale with over 1,000 participants concluded that psychedelic use in naturalistic settings was associated with significant improvements in depressive and anxious symptoms and with increased emotional well-being, effects that the author indicated are, quote, very similar to those observed in controlled laboratory studies. Furthermore, multiple studies report that psychedelic use is associated with reduced odds of committing property or violent crime. Meanwhile, over a quarter of individuals who commit aggravated assault do so under the influence of alcohol, a substance widely accepted and even encouraged in our society. But you may be wondering, why should we decriminalize more substances that have the potential to do harm? After all, we've all heard of so-called bad trips that people can experience on psychedelics. While there are risks involved in many decisions, serious adverse experiences with psychedelics are rare and are usually psychological rather than physical, since psychedelics don't present a significant risk of fatal overdose. One Johns Hopkins study collected data from nearly 2,000 participants about their single most difficult psychedelic experience. In the worst of the worst for these people, only 2.6% behaved in a physically aggressive manner during the episode, and only 2.7% received medical assistance. Strikingly, 84% reported ultimately benefiting from the experience. The truth is, the harms to society related to prosecution and incarceration are greater than those that can result from using these substances. Fundamentally, this is a human rights issue. Entheogenic plants and fungi have a history of use dating back at least 5,000 years on this continent. These natural healing remedies are a vital aspect of spiritual practice for many people, and criminalizing them or restricting them to medical settings is a direct violation of the religious liberty endowed by our Constitution. And it just doesn't make sense. For example, DMT, a psychedelic that's been revered as sacred in South American culture for thousands of years, is endogenous to the human body. In other words, it's currently a criminal offense to possess a compound that's present in all of our bodies at this very moment. It should say something that the other cities that enacted these measures voted to do so unanimously. We wouldn't want you to act without feeling confident that your decision is in the best interest of the East Lansing residents who elected you. We encourage a continued dialogue about this issue so we can all be confident that your decision comes from an informed place, a compassionate place, and with the health, safety, and well-beings of East Lansing residents in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kat Ebert, Katebert. Okay, my name is Kat Ebert. I currently serve, I'm also speaking towards decriminalization of psychedelics, I should say. Okay. I currently serve as the chair of the board of directors for Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I've been a Michigan resident my entire life, and I am a person who uses drugs. I'm here to speak in support of a resolution to change the city policy regarding entheogenic plants and fungi, in addition to making the possession and use of all controlled substances the lowest level of law enforcement priority. My story begins when I was 15 years old and was abused by former U.S. gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar. The trauma from that experience and the assaults and rapes that have happened since have unsurprisingly made periods of time in my life very difficult. PTSD, anxiety, depression, self-harm, and substance abuse all contributed to those difficult times, and antidepressant drugs weren't working for me and 33% of the population. It wasn't until years later that I finally found something that worked, something that not only helped me experience and feel joy again, but kickstarted my healing journey. That something was non-plant medicine psychedelic drugs, or more specifically, lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, acid. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive again. I felt connected to my body, my mind, and the people and objects around me. Inspired and intensely curious about these drugs and how they work, I obtained my Bachelor's of Science in Neuroscience with a Pharmacology and Toxicology minor last May from MSU. I now work for a clinical psychedelic research company that is investigating MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD and can attest to the healing powers of these substances. With that being said, psychedelics are not cure-all drugs, and they do require deep work and integration. This is often done in groups or with a qualified therapist or integration specialist. The community-based healing aspect surrounding traditional entheogenic decriminalization policies is arguably the most important, hence the need to decriminalize more than just the possession and use of these substances. Additionally, to ensure that an individual's experience is safe, proper education and access to harm reduction materials is absolutely necessary. These include things like testing reagents and analysis equipment, preparation and integration circles led by certified guides and professionals, and safe consumption sites where individuals are able to use substances without the fear of legal or medical harm. While I'm aware that safe consumption sites are far in the future for East Lansing or even the state of Michigan, it's one example of what a post-prohibition world should look like. I also think it's important to note that as the plant medicine movement grows stronger every day, psychedelics that are not considered plants or fungi are experiencing a new wave of stigmatization. Drugs like LSD, MDMA, MDA, and ketamine, which all have strong anecdotal and peer-reviewed scientific support of treating various mental health issues, have been left out of the political healing agenda, leaving the door open for people like me to be arrested and/or incarcerated for using my medicine of choice. I'm not asking the council to fix the system. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it was designed to. The war on drugs was created to incarcerate marginalized identities, specifically Black and brown people in communities of lower socioeconomic class, to remove their voices from the political process and exploit them for free labor and profit. What I am asking of the council is to implement new strategies and responses regarding substance use and possession in the city of East Lansing, to view this as a public health issue and not a public safety issue, because no one should be incarcerated for a nonviolent drug offense. Finally, to address a few common concerns, decriminalization will not increase substance use. Portugal and downtown East Vancouver both have data that show drug use actually decreases following decriminalization. The lack of research surrounding psychedelics stems from drug war policies, and although there are a steadily growing number of peer-reviewed articles, I'd argue that the best knowledge stems from communities that have been using entheogenic plants and fungi for thousands of years. I urge the council to work with groups like Students for Sensible Drug Policy and Decriminalize Nature Bend, Michigan, to expand the scope of this resolution and take historic steps to ending the disastrous war on drugs while simultaneously fostering community-based healing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more in-person comment?
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm Conrad Hitner, 639 Kedzie Street. I am here from the Bailey neighborhood, but not here on behalf of the Bailey neighborhood this evening. I'm here to encourage you to take up the idea, suggestion for a moratorium on the further issuance of special use permits for congregate housing of the type that serves Greek organizations as well as co-ops in the city of East Lansing. Our current statutory scheme really disconnects the applicants of these for these allowances from the people who are actually living in the residences. The privileges of the special use permits are extended not to fraternities or sororities or to co-ops. They're extended to the landlords who are the underlying owners of the property these organizations live in. And the current statutory scheme doesn't require much in the way of additional steps from those landlords except for the provision of a parking plan necessary to accommodate the activities of their tenants. I'd suggest to you that that in and of itself is insufficient, and that what we probably need to have is an amendment of the ordinances to more firmly tie the requests of the landlords for special use permits to their present or future candidate tenants of their properties. At this point, landlords actually don't have any obligation to tell us who their tenants are. In at least one instance that we have on tonight's list of SUP applicants, the landlord didn't have any candidate organization when he applied for it. That specifically being the one in the Cedar Village area of the city. That is, actually, I'm not even sure that building's built yet, but the special use permit was granted on the assumption that he would, in one way or another, market that to a candidate organization. I'm suggesting that the city's ordinances really need to reflect a direct connection between the landlord and the tenant organization so that issues that arise with the behavior of members of the tenant organizations provide some incentive for the landlord to intervene or to otherwise affect their clients or their tenants' behavior in ways that mitigate interventions necessary by local officials, or for that matter, by university officials. The fact that our ordinance really only requires a parking plan, I think on its face is insufficient, and I suggest to you that additional rules are probably in order. I'm not an expert on the zoning enabling statutes of the great state of Michigan. I'm not a scholar of equal protection law, but I would suggest to you that the different types of organizations probably also require slightly different approaches from a regulatory standpoint because they operate on their face differently from one another. The notion that they have to be treated equally because they cater to two different genders, I think it doesn't square with reality of how those organizations have historically and continue today to operate. I look forward to participating in that process if you decide to go forward with it, and I'm Happy to answer any questions you all might have of me. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In-person comments? Once. Anyone in the online queue?
We do not have any callers on the line.
If no further audience comments, we'll move on to communications from council. I'll start with Councilperson Brookover.
No, thank you.
Councilperson Babcock.
Yes, today I had an incredible honor. I got to meet Shannon Watts, who is the founder of Moms Demand Action in Everytown for gun safety. And partially why I'm wearing red, today was their rally day. And after speaking with her about common sense gun regulation, I walked out, I checked my phone, and there was a text from the much better half. And it said, "It's okay. One of our nephews passed through that subway station an hour earlier. He's fine." And the shooting in Brooklyn today happens to be in the subway station where one of my favorite nephews enters to go to high school in Brooklyn. And it's just a reminder that this madness touches all of us when we least expect it. None of us deserve it. And someday it just has to stop. So on a more city relevant notion, our other favorite thing, free yard waste, is coming up. I believe free yard waste starts next Monday for the east side. I'm scrolling. Being on the west side, I'm partial to that. So east side, April 18 and May 9. West side, April 25 and May 16. Thank you.
Councilperson Watson.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg.
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, I'll definitely just kind of build off of what Councilperson Babcock was just saying. I'm looking out at one of our law enforcement friends out there, and I think I was just talking to my son, and they're preparing for prom and graduation and all those types of things, and he was talking about post-prom, and he's like, "Well, that's boring. We're going to do these other things," and all I literally was having to think about is, they give you an escape strategy. Like, I can't even imagine now when I send my kids out to a party or whatever event, you need like a whole contingency about what to do in the event of an active shooter or any of these things. And I know our law enforcement community is perplexed, and the communities are at our wits' end and everything else. So I understand the pain of this conversation, because it was weird. I were trying to figure out an outfit, and the second conversation was, how to get to safety and what to do in the event of an active shooter. So that's leading up to prom and graduation, which is a really sad state of affairs, and where we're landing with this. I don't have really any answers. I just wanted to share that commentary and know that we're kind of in this together and as a community. And I'd like to have better answers for you, but I'm always open to having conversations about it. And that was kind of part of my conversation earlier about diversion and other things, and kind of filling that space, and whatever we can do as a community to fill that space to keep our young people safe. I think we need to do it. We can't invest enough money in that area right now to try to be that diversion as a city for our kids. And that's it for me. Communication from the city manager. Thank you. Next up, we move to item 6.1, discussion of a resolution on a moratorium for special use permits establishing fraternities and sororities.
Good evening, Council. I'm Tom Fehrenbach, the Director of Planning, Building, and Development. As you are aware, last week you had a conversation relative to a public hearing for 532 Ann Street, where you asked staff to look into the possibility of a moratorium on special use permits for fraternity and sorority type uses, to allow staff the time to investigate our processes and procedures related to those approvals. Tonight, we thought it might be best for you to hear from representatives from Michigan State University first. So I might invite Suchitra Webster to the podium to address you. And then just also know that Dr. Aaron Carter is here from MSU as well as I think probably the key staff, Peter Menser from the Planning and Zoning, and Annette Irwin from our Housing and University Relations. So with that, with your blessing, I'd turn it over to Sue.
This table is also available too, if that would be more comfortable, whichever you prefer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does this work? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
fantastic. So good evening, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing me to take a few minutes and speak with you. So my name is Sue Chitra, or Sue Webster. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Student and Community Relations at Michigan State University. And Dr. Erin Carter, who is the Interim Director of Fraternity and Sorority Life at Michigan State University, is also here. She has a bit of a cold and sore throat, so I'm going to try to give a bit of a broad overview of some of the things we think you may want to know. And then if there are specifics that I cannot answer or that Erin would like to talk about, she will certainly chime in at any time. Yes, you can come sit up here. That would be wonderful. So while Erin gets up here and gets situated, I'm going to go ahead, I think, and get started just to give you some basic information. And some of you are familiar with some of these things, so I apologize if any of it's repetitive, and if you've heard enough, we're willing to stop at any time. So we're here to talk about the group housing program at Michigan State University, but what you first have to understand is that we have required our freshmen, first-year students to live on campus for some time. And while we've done that, there is a rule on the books, essentially, that sophomores also have to live on. In the 1980s, we stopped enforcing that policy. The Board of Trustees at the time made that decision and determination. And we, after a lot of exploration, looking at information and numbers about students who live on during that sophomore year, looking at persistence and retention, that's a whole nother presentation. But I can tell you that the decision was made for the class that came in the fall of 21 to live on campus for 2 years. As part of that process, something that we discussed and came up with is a group housing program, looking at congregate housing settings that already existed off campus and giving those students in those houses an opportunity to apply to be part of an alternative program, in essence, allowing them to live off campus in particular group housing should they meet certain criteria and standards. And I'm looking to you because with this mic, I'm going back and forth. And if you think I need to add anything, you're doing good? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. So in terms of eligibility criteria, and I have a list, so I'm going to throw on my reading glasses here and go through this. Participants needed to be registered student organizations in good standing. They needed to be participants in nonprofit organizations. They're not entities out to make money. Participant facility needs to have a City of East Lansing Class 6B rental license for group housing in a fraternity, sorority, co-op, or another valid City of East Lansing rental license type with an SUP to operate as group housing facility. And the reason that particular thing is really important is these are houses that already existed, and we wanted them to work within the parameters of city rules, policies, ordinances. So that was why it's laid out in that way. So most of the houses that have applied to be part of this, they are either grandfathered in, and Erin can certainly, Dr. Carter can talk about the number of facilities we're talking about. But it's, this is a handful of SUPs, I believe, that you've had to deal with as people realize that. So the other thing is the participant facility can only have one house, one participant organization. So it's not that, fraternity X can have 8 houses, or sorority Y can have their house, 2 annexes with letters, etc. Each organization can have one house. So there's also, a number of things. That's eligibility criteria, but we also look at the house and property itself, and then we look at the people who want to live in that house or property itself in terms of criteria. So when we look at the house itself, and you heard me talk about things like the rental license or SUP, we also want to know about inspections. We want to know if it's getting the seal of approval from Tom Fehrenbach, Annette Irwin, et cetera, that it's an okay place to live in terms of things that the building inspector has looked at, things that, the people that go and check each property. So that was important to us to know. But then in terms of our students, we had other criteria that we wanted to look at. Students have to be in the organization. So the organization has to confirm that this person is indeed a member in good standing. As a student, that student cannot be on academic probation, nor can a given student be on conduct probation through our Dean of Students office and the Office of Student Rights and Accountability. So that was really important. And then houses, for example, that were on terms and conditions were not eligible to take part in this process. So those are some of the general things that I think I wanted to make sure that you were all aware of. And then, yes, very important. Thank you. This one, number 6. Yes. So I was at University Student Commission last week and addressed this with the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem who were in attendance. One thing that we really think it's important for everyone to know is the issue of liability insurance for the participating facilities. So the participant, I'm just going to read from this, is required to provide a certificate of liability insurance, which must include general liability insurance with limits not less than $1 million per occurrence and $2 million annual aggregate. Coverage must include premises liability, sexual abuse, molestation, host liquor liability, and MSU as an additional insured party. All required insurance is to be issued by an insurance company with an AM Best rating of A or higher, which is authorized to do business in the state of Michigan. So that was something in addition in terms of everything from, the fire inspection to, having other folks take a look at it. So I think that that's really important for everyone to be aware of. I don't know if you want to add anything. One more thing, I just thought of this and saw this too, is educational standards and policies from campus. There are certain, basic trainings that we require our students to go through in, conjunction with relationship violence and sexual assault, sexual misconduct issues, and also other types of trainings on alcohol, other drug use, et cetera. There's just a whole cadre of trainings, and our students have to have done that and completed that successfully. That's just another part of this process. So, Erin, is there anything? Okay, so those are kind of the big picture items, I think, that might not have been explained quite in this way, in a format where all of you had been able to hear that, and I wanted to make sure that we did that. And also to let you know that MSU is taking a much more proactive approach with many of these registered student organizations and trying to work with them so that they can be successful, not only as individuals, students and student success, but so that they are better members of the community and better student organizations overall. So I want you to understand some of the rationale behind these plans. So are there questions?
I did have a question, if that's okay. Apologies to Dr. Carter, but I think this might be one for you, even with your froggy voice. So we had, I'm estimating, but I think it was about 6 SUPs that have come through in the last couple of months, most of which we approved. I would say about half of them were an instance where the house was already operating as a fraternity, and this is what Ms. Webster referenced, kind of just getting their house in order. Where it got a little bit dicey for us were the ones that were new and had not been operating as a fraternity previously, especially when it was a building that had not been built purpose to housing a fraternity or even a group housing situation. So the grandfathered in, I guess, where does it end? Like, how many do we have that are grandfathered in that are kind of, the big purpose-built houses that will not be coming to us ever because they are what they are? And then the little batch that we just got, and I'm kind of anticipating that a year into the second year live on, we will probably see another batch of people who maybe sat out this round but would be interested in joining the second year exemption next year after they see how it works. I guess I'm just kind of asking for how many existing do we have outside of the ones that came to us to update their paperwork?
Yeah, and sorry for the voice, but
it's all right.
It doesn't hurt, so don't worry. Just
excellent.
I do, and hopefully Peter or Annette can jump in and help me in a minute. But in terms of fraternities and sororities that are traditionally housed, which are interfraternity council and Panhellenic council, all of them are participating with the exception of 3. One is a small chapter that has less than 10 members and doesn't have a big chapter house, and they don't plan to have one in the foreseeable future. One is a group that actually, I think you already granted an SUP for, and they chose to sit out. It's the one on Harrison. That's the
interesting
few buildings, the big beer can at some point. That one.
Delightful. Yes. Good neighbors always.
Yeah. So they chose to sit out voluntarily. They didn't want to participate in the first year. And then the third one is a chapter that did not apply during the period of application. They were reminded that they were missing it and they chose not to, so they have to sit out a year because they missed the opportunity. So they're the only one I foresee showing up next year, and they're in an established house they own. They're not moving. It'll just be there. They'll apply in the future.
So basically everybody that was kind of doing business as a Greek society within the MSU East Lansing community has kind of already been recognized by this process.
And we don't have any people backlog that we see coming down the pipeline looking for houses. We don't know of any that are planning to show up tomorrow and need a house, for example. And Conrad just asked me how many people own, their national organization or alumni board owns their house, and I have to figure that out because I don't know off the top of my head. But many of them are owned by something that's an affiliate of their organization. That's vastly true of the women's organizations. Most of those are owned by a subsidiary of their national organization, a housing corporation, for example. For men, it's a little bit more of a mix. And tends to be groups that are renting, that aren't affiliated, kind of just switch. They move around. Like this chapter moves to this house, that one moves to that house. They just swap. They don't necessarily take over a new house as a fraternity. They just move for whatever reason based on chapter sizes or other needs.
Yeah, I was thinking what could those reasons possibly be, but that makes sense.
It's typically chapter sizes. If they've gotten bigger, they need a bigger house. If they've gotten smaller, they move to a smaller house based on rentals.
Okay, so addressing this situation, it sounds like we might be kind of closing the barn door a little bit late, but who knows?
And I think to our point, right, we tried to, and Sue said this, we tried to establish operating within what we understood the licensing piece to be, and to understand we wanted to bring all these organizations that have existed for a long time into good standing in terms of the paperwork and the licensure and all of that. And in some cases, I think most of them are pretty old buildings that have operated contiguously as fraternities, and so those are the ones probably grandfathered in. It's the ones that maybe have for a few years at least been operating as fraternities that maybe needed the SUP, and for whatever reason it wasn't in place. And now they're seeking to close that loop because we've said they need to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel bad asking you to talk so much.
It doesn't hurt at all. You just have to suffer it. But I would say Peter or Annette, Peter has a better sense of where we are on SUPs.
All right. Hi, Mr. Mentor.
Good evening, everybody. Peter Mentor, Planning and Zoning Administrator. Just want to give a little bit of information. Sorry, it's still falling up here. So the overall, I'm counting, this is not, please don't quote me on this as an official count of all Greek organizations in the city. I've got 60 plus just in my spreadsheet that we ran. And it looks like 5, 6, 7, 8 of those fall under special use permit. And as Aaron mentioned, there are a lot of them are just predate our ordinance. My research indicates it looks like we started requiring a special use permit in 1992. So moving forward, or how we've been capturing these, I guess is probably maybe the best way to say it. And keep in mind, I've been at the city for almost 1 year. But generally, the idea is, as an organization, if maybe it's a long-standing organization that's been here for a long time, they have one of the traditional buildings here. If they were to, they certainly are covered. They're existing right now. If they were to expand, I don't have a specific square footage or percentage, but if they were to expand significantly on the property, that I think would be enough to require them to come through the process. If they are, as you're seeing right now, organizations that have existed here that may be moving from one location to the other. And what we've seen lately are not moving into the traditional kind of what I always considered kind of in the movies, the fraternity houses, of the Class B, what we call them, units with bedrooms and then common cooking facilities and recreational facilities in the house, but into other types of apartment buildings. I think those are or homes, and that's the requests that you've seen lately. Those would certainly qualify for a special use permit, and we've been required them as we come across them. And that's why our partnership with MSU is so crucial, is I think we can help each other identify these organizations, where they are, kind of what they're up to. So I look at the special use permit requirement as a safeguard for the community in order to understand kind of the scope, who these organizations are, where they're going, what they do. And this is a great vehicle, the special use requirement, to get that information and to get them before council and planning commission to understand all that information. So I just answered the question for now, and I'm happy to answer more if you have any.
I have some questions, not for you, Peter. So Ms. Webster, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I want you to understand I respect your work. You're great. But I do have some questions. First of all, the beer can fraternity. I didn't quite understand. Are they in or are they out?
They voluntarily decided not to apply, so they're not participating.
Okay, well, we gave them a special use permit.
They're not, I think it's the second year live on that they're opting
Right.
out.
They're
Yeah.
not.
Oh, so they're not having sophomores in that facility.
Correct.
Thank you.
They're still a fraternity.
Yep.
So I have a line of questions that really go back to one of the presentations that was made on this Ann Street house. So the IFC is actually a university agency, is that correct?
I mean, Interfraternity Council is a governing council that oversees the 29 traditionally male, traditionally white fraternities. It's modeled after IFCs. There's a national Interfraternity Council that governs all fraternities across all college campuses. So it's modeled after that.
So is it a creature of Michigan State University or not?
I guess you would say yes. The university has a relationship agreement with the four governing councils.
And if I understood what you said correctly, you're now requiring these living facilities to have an insurance policy and include Michigan State University as an additional insured, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is my understanding correct that Michigan State University provides no insurance for these facilities?
That's correct.
Okay. And as a matter of fact, Michigan State University has refused to do that off and on for the last 25 years. Isn't that correct? If you know.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if I have a contract in the dorms, I sign a contract and it binds me, like a rental agreement, it binds me to do a number of things in order to keep the privilege of staying in a dorm, correct? And among those things is I have to observe university policies, I can't break the law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if in fact the occupant of that room violates those things, that person, after some minimal due process of the university, can be kicked out of that room, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And parenthetically also maybe kicked out of the university.
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to transfer to a sophomore in one of these facilities. So as I understand the presentation that was given to us, in effect, the behavioral aspects of these units are self-policing. Isn't that correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay, well, so if they want to have a party, they have to designate somebody at the fraternity who's the marshal or the sheriff or whatever you call it under your policies, correct? It's your policies. And then they designate that person, and then certain situations, if they want to have a policy, if they want to have a party with liquor, they have to go get permission from you through the IFC, correct?
No.
Okay, so you don't have anything to do with that. It's the IFC that does that, correct?
The Interfraternity Council and Panhellenic Council have
Okay.
a joint social policy that
So
requires them
you
to
don't
register.
oversee any of that?
Correct.
Okay, so they're self-policing on alcohol, whatever else they have in these living units, correct? Okay.
Yes.
And Michigan State University provides no insurance for any risk that occurs in those facilities, correct?
Correct.
Yet, if somebody has an untoward event in those situations and somebody gets sued and they sue Michigan State University for supposedly not policing the situation correctly, Michigan State University has coverage for that lawsuit, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it works one way, but not the other way. And let me just keep
Okay,
going
yeah,
here.
please go
okay?
ahead.
Well, if you think I'm wrong, fine, I'm wrong.
No.
All right, so then in these leases, I assume each occupant of these facilities signs an individual lease with the board of control or the alumni board or whoever actually owns the house, correct? Or don't you know?
No, and the lease, there's different types of lease. Sometimes it's a lease to individuals between the property manager or owner
Okay.
and the individuals. Sometimes it's to the whole chapter in group.
Okay, but you don't approve those leases,
No.
right?
We were,
And you don't enforce those leases? No. Okay, so as a practical matter, when you talk or an alumni individual comes and talks to us about the whole schematic for making sure that these people are good citizens, and I think the vast majority of them are good citizens, the reality of the schematic is they have to enforce that, and there's no university involvement other than if by chance something gets reported to the university through self-reporting. Is that correct?
no, not necessarily. So we have, I think what this process allows us to do, and in general, in the directions we're changing in fraternity sorority life, through our partnership with the city and city staff, and through Sue's position, as there are violations and citations and behavior things that occur, those get reported to us at the university, and we follow up with those chapters and those individuals to discuss the harm that's been caused and to talk with them about the behavior. And if it's broken a university policy, to connect them with whatever that process is. And in cases where it's a sexual assault or an alleged violation with alcohol, like drugging people or something like that, if we follow up by putting it into our conduct process for student organizations, and those end up with investigations and other things
Okay.
like that.
But
So-
you don't find out about those things unless somebody tells you, correct?
Well, we have I would say a known established process. Anytime they occur, they get sent to us.
By whom?
Go ahead.
We work with East Lansing Police and East Lansing Fire.
Okay. So we spent an hour and 45 minutes on our budget today. So no offense to the two of you. So when the powers to be at Michigan State University were talking about implementing this new system and finally enforcing a rule that's 40 years old and allowing sophomores to live in East Lansing, was there any discussion, since apparently the city of East Lansing is now at least partly the enforcement mechanism for you to enforce this process? Because I don't remember, did somebody offer us like $1 million to help pay for our cops and for Peter and the people we have that are in the end going to have to report this stuff to you?
No, George,
Okay,
no.
thank you.
No. But what I would say is that you have a population living among you already, and we work with city staff regularly. I think this is a sea change for the institution to try and work with these students in ways that, quite frankly, at least in the last 30 years, and I think Annette and others who have been around for a while could attest, that the university has not taken a proactive approach like this ever.
And I agree totally, and that's really kind of my point. And I'm happy the students are here. It's a great town because the students are here. But when you effectuate, in your own words, a quote, sea change, end quote, in my humble opinion, it would be kind of nice if there had been some additional work with the city in terms of what burden we were now going to have to carry to help you enforce what I think you want to try to enforce.
But I'm sorry, Erin, I was just going to say, I don't see that there's going to be anything additional or new. It's doing what we've been doing all this time with police and fire. And I also think that there are self-report mechanisms, which now those who are sort of granted this opportunity will have to report certain things. And I think Erin may be about to talk about that, if I'm not mistaken.
And to Sue's point, I think, I used to be the community liaison before Sue was. And I remember back then, Annette and others would send me the citations for houses. And because of the institutional position on them, we would say thank you and file them. Like, we didn't do anything with them. And now I think the difference is the institution takes those inputs we've been getting for many years and we're acting on them. We're having conversations. We're putting students through the paces of being responsible for those behaviors. So it's not extra or new work. It's our reaction to the inputs is different. And that's when we say a sea change, right? I do think we have a built into the process, once approved, groups are responsible to fill out it's an online form they have to complete anytime they've had a visit with an East Lansing police officer, a PACE officer, an EMS person, a fire person. They have to report that within 24 hours of the visit so that we get a register from them as the students on what's happened.
And that's self-reporting, is that correct?
They have to report it, so then I can also match it up with what I get from my...
I know it, but you're trusting them to report it to you, correct?
Well, because if I get a ticket from Annette or the police and they haven't reported it, then that's a consequence that they're not being forthcoming.
Correct.
Right? So we will connect the dots. If we hear from them and I don't hear from the city, then I'll try to figure out what happened. If I hear from the city side but not from the students, that's a conversation about not being forthcoming with their information.
I would also add that from the Office of Student Support and Accountability, formerly known as Student Rights and Responsibilities, Dean of Students Office oversees all of that. I personally have had to work with colleagues and serve as a complainant because we have a complainant-driven system at Michigan State. And we have dealt with situations and cases that have arisen off campus and worked with our conduct system to manage and adjudicate those.
Right. I'm not trying to hammer you guys, but I'm just trying to understand so the public understands some of this.
Yes.
So you've implemented this system this last fall, correct? Okay.
Are you talking about the off-campus
Yes, ma'am.
conduct? No, it's I will say we haven't really changed a lot in terms of the policies in Spartan Life, we have been able to, we've taken, again, a more proactive approach in dealing with off-campus cases.
But sophomores could start living off campus this last fall, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking about,
The program that we're doing for group housing was an application this year for students to live off campus starting this fall, 22.
Okay, so it has not been in effect
They
this year?
have not
No.
lived
Okay,
there yet.
thank you.
Yeah.
Councilperson Babcock?
Some people talked about the insurance and affordability for everybody. And so were some people left out, like your co-ops or, you know?
So that is a very good question, because that's one that Erin and I and others on the group housing committee have been talking about quite a bit. The liability, the insurance, is something that was generated by our risk management folks at the university and our Office of General Counsel. And in order to move forward with this, we needed to ensure that all of the participants would be able to meet that threshold. I have spoken personally with the leadership at the co-ops, including the executive director, about their inability to secure that level of insurance at this point. And Erin and I are continuing to work with the co-ops. This is part one, year one of these applications. And so we want to talk with co-ops and other potentially interested groups about how we can work on some of those things. We realize that this is not the perfect system, if you will, at year one. And Erin, I don't know if you want to add anything to.
Just that I think the standards were set as our starting point, and I think we know that this is year one, and as we look to see how can we be more open to other alternative choices like co-ops and more affordable options, I think we're open to that. It will be in a future cycle because the standards are set for the current cycle.
So what do you think we ought to do? You think we ought to put a moratorium on this while you guys sort of get things figured out? Because it sort of kind of sounds like you don't have everything figured out yet, right? So do you think we ought to put a moratorium on stuff?
I think a lot of the SUPs have already been issued. There aren't that many more coming, so I don't know. It makes a lot of sense to put one in place. I don't foresee a bunch more coming down the pipeline. And I was asking Peter, what is it? Is there possibilities to do things on it the way that the paperwork is taken in that helps match up groups to property owners, to Conrad's point, right? Is there ways that some of that can be tracked in the way the paperwork administrative pieces occur? I don't know. I'm not an expert in city government, so I don't know what has to be. So my thought is there aren't that many to be still in the pipeline. So it's worth discussing and studying, but I don't know that a moratorium changes that much.
I'll say definitely would have helped if we did this together. But like you said, that barn door's open. I do think in most things, and we talked about this in the student commission, so it's not really blindsiding you. It did feel a little bit like the plane was flying, and then you were kind of putting in seats and doors and all that kind of thing as the plane was already up in the air. So that was a little concerning. I think MSU in general, because it was not totally your responsibility, had an endpoint and just kind of framed everything to get to that endpoint, no matter kind of where it went. In my profession, we kind of have to war game these things and see where the holes are going to blow out in this. That I don't think that occurred so much. I think people had I think that's what people are perceiving as that, when you got to say it in the public, for the money grab piece and that whole thing, that narrative, I think comes from just the not really gaming this out quite as well as it could have been done, and just for future reference, and city managers got something. But I think just from the public perspective and some of the things that I've said and seem to have gave that perception, real or unreal. I think so in future reference to these types of decisions, that would help if we wore them out together and figure out kind of where we're going to blow holes and things, and that'll help. And then we can answer these questions from the public better and represent you guys better from when these questions come from the neighborhoods and things like that.
Over the past, people have questions about the SUP process and the sort of influx of fraternities, whether they were here, whether they were in informal fraternities. I understand the questions, but the one thing I would say about that is that the university, for the first time in the 23 years I've been here, over the past 2 years, has made a really concerted effort to get involved and recognize that off-campus behaviors of students is something that they want to have some look at, some say in, some consequences for. And that's been the first time that has been, the university looking off of their campus in like the 23 years I've been here. It has been a very positive step. It really came about from trying to look at and control behaviors around the issue of COVID-19. And it turned into a positive in that the university is still willing to look at the off-campus behaviors. And while certainly there's a lot of things on both sides for us to work on, I do think that the university has made a serious effort to actually try to improve behaviors and try to recognize that their students have lives off campus. So I do think there's been positive movement, and I think this issue of fraternities and sororities is a little bit of a growing pain with the sophomores off campus, but I would take overall the direction that the university is going with the city as being positive over the last 2 years, and I certainly appreciate the efforts.
Oh, no doubt about that part of it. I didn't want to, but I know talking directly and from Sue's depiction of the improvements, even in the way to levy the conduct policy, which was when we were talking about this like a year ago, how we were asking questions. I remember the exact conversation. You were like, nope, can't do that, can't do. There was like 10 things where like, what do you do if this happens? And none of them had any teeth. Yeah. So I think we've come a long way even from in a year's time. So that's part of the depiction. I think just what's come up many times and even came up from our student commission and the gentleman sitting next to me is like, gosh, this is inequitable. And I think we're seeing that even now with the co-ops, like who has 1 million, 2 million. Most people don't even have that on their house sometimes, so that's pretty, and that's a lot of coverage for someone who's trying to create an economical thing in the co-op system. So that I frankly don't think that was thought about all the way through. Just kind of, we have to acknowledge that. But Mayor Pro Tem.
Two questions. First of all, I wanted to thank you guys for offering yourselves up as the scapegoats for this community angst conversation. I know that this decision was not made personally by either of you, and you've been very patient with us, peppering you with questions. And I know from having worked with both of you in the community groups and through the student commission that you're making the best of a situation that you are also not particularly thrilled with. So I appreciate the work that you guys have put in and letting us question you. My second question is not directed at you guys, but actually to our council, and maybe to George as well. So I think historically we've had a problem connecting violations at properties to tenants as opposed to landlords. And I think Mr. Hitner's comments that it would be nice if these violations followed the members of the fraternity rather than the landlord who might be absentee or working through a management company. But under Michigan property law, do you see a pathway to doing that where we can attach property violations to tenants that are not an owner?
Did you want to speak on that, or Mr. Chubb?
Nobody wants to talk about that.
Can you reframe the question, please?
Sure. I think Mr. Hittner's comments at the beginning hinted at the fact that it would be nice to hold the individual members of the fraternity, I say fraternity because traditionally that is the group that we have had the most problems with, since sorority houses are not traditionally big drinking establishments. Anyway. But we've had a problem just in general across our community connecting property violations to tenants as opposed to landlords. So we can issue, theoretically the tenants should shovel the walk, but the landlord is the one that gets the ticket, right? So in looking at our SUP situation, is there a way legally that we can tie public safety violations to the members of the house as opposed to the property address?
I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that.
I think that Chad may be the one to talk, but I think that some violations, like a noise violation, party noise violation, party litter violations, are directed at a person, and that follows the person. It doesn't get to this issue. I mean, it may get to the issue of MSU not allowing that person to go off campus because of violations, right? So in that respect, our violations or their sort of good neighbor violations might actually impact your guys' behavior in terms of their opting out of sophomore year, right?
And when we get a ticket and it's to an individual, we look to see what chapter that individual is associated with, and it gets credited or counted towards that fraternity, right? Because that person is a representation of their fraternity, and the raging party's at that house, and we understand the raging party doesn't get the ticket. Some individual has to get it on behalf. Okay. And we understand that they will rotate individuals so that one person doesn't get the ticket. They put up a new person every time, right? We understand that. And so we count all those tickets as notches in the belt on that fraternity, right? And then that's part of the conversation we have with them around their behavior. When they get citations, depending on the nature of them, we contact the national organization and we say, your chapter looks really bad here. This is what they're doing. This is the problems they've caused. This is the amount of time, energy, attention, bandwidth of a police service you've taken. We don't appreciate it. Can you help us out, right? So even though it's individuals, they go through their own municipal process as ticket holders, but from a organizational standpoint, it counts towards their organization.
Okay.
Right?
A black mark, as it were.
Yeah, and I think it relates to group housing, right? We're talking about the main house being the one that is approved for sophomores, but we're going to work to identify annex houses and individuals that get tickets at annex houses. If they map back to that same house,
that would be an amazing
they will
step
count
in the
in
process.
that same. Right, it will count in that same picture of the chapter.
Rah. Where can
Right.
I send that letter of support?
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to, like, our understanding, right, is that these fraternities have been operating for many years in the community, and we've pretty much had a hands-off approach. So we're trying to say, let's pull them into our boundaries and start to monitor their stuff, right? I imagine as we get better at it over time and hone exactly what we're looking for, some of the standards will get stronger and better. Some will get dropped, probably not in a negative way, but get improved.
Okay.
This was just, I think, the mayor's point, trying to figure it out in the 11th hour on the last day, right? That was the experience we had.
Yes.
And it was because the Board of Trustees made a decision at a December meeting.
Those darn elected officials.
For the very next academic year's enrollment, and it was a hurry up, you got to get this done. So, not ideal.
Sorry, you're standing very patiently. So any comments, I guess, on the situation, but then also, can you confirm my feeling that a lot of these tickets are complaint-driven tickets?
Yeah, I would say the vast majority of the citations, probably upwards in the 90+ percentile range, go directly to an individual when we get a complaint or we have to make contact for an event or an issue that is occurring. The ones that sometimes would be hard are things like the snow on the sidewalk or trash if there's no one there, where it could be issued to the landlord property owner type thing, but that's a rarity comparison to a lot of the response calls where we always issue a citation to what we would try to identify to be a resident of that property.
Okay, so I had that backwards. Okay, cool. Glad to be corrected, thank you.
Do you have any mechanism to assess potential discrimination in the entry of people into the fraternity or sorority? Is that part of your criteria? I didn't hear it. You talked about sexual assaults and things like that, but I didn't hear anything about discrimination.
I don't know that it's explicit in the packet of materials, but I think as a university, that's just, it's a
It does say bias.
Yeah, if there's incidents of bias or discrimination, there's a reporting mechanism that people can report, and those will go to the Office of Institutional Equity for evaluation. Anyone in our community is free to enter those. They can be anonymous, or you can provide your information. In terms of membership into each chapter, that is not something the institution does. That's up to the national organization standards of membership.
So I think I heard you say two things. So anybody in the campus community can make a complaint to what I call OIE about a act of discrimination. But in terms of the setup that you guys have put together based on the edict from the Board of Trustees, there's no specific mechanism for you to test the issue of discrimination in terms of admission to any of these entities.
No.
Yeah, thank you. It is like, thanks for coming and responding to me. I realize that, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry, so.
That's okay. That's all right.
Further questions? Thank you.
I guess to wrap up from our perspective, Tom, were you going to step back up, or are we all set? So at this point, do we want this on for consideration for next week, or does council?
I guess I do have a question for Mr. Menzer. Your familiarity with the language of zoning codes is obviously much higher than mine, which is why you have your job and I have my job. Do you see within our SUP areas that we could tighten it up in terms of, I think we're specifically, I guess I can't speak for the rest of council, but I am specifically interested in the public safety burden that these institutions have left us with. Do you see space within our SUP to improve our relationship with these people, or to, I think essentially we're looking for something that we could take away from them, which would be the SUP, right, if they violate.
Well, in my capacity as staff, I'm here to advise. I think my objective opinion is frankly no. I don't see the special use permit process as being the vehicle where we can regulate some of the behaviors or some of the perceived issues that we're having with this particular type of land use. So I think it's really important that we frame our expectations kind of going into this, and I'm not sure, and I've gone through it in my mind quite a bit over the last week about how exactly we fit these kind of things in, particularly to the SUP, because really that process is all about compatibility of land uses. Where are they located and what are they close to? And it doesn't speak directly to bad behavior. I think we've got laws on the books that talk about some of those items, but it really talks about, and I want to clarify a point that was made earlier, it's not just about parking. We use the special use permit, all of the special use permit criteria, also parking. So it's all about whether they're compatible with their uses, and there's, whatever 10 criteria that we've got for that, but also is there enough parking on that site or in the adjacent area that would facilitate this kind of use. Certainly, I think if we do want to consider changes to the ordinance, I would advocate for a text amendment, maybe that we could clarify some of the items that were mentioned earlier. Beefing up, we have a rather short section about fraternities and sororities. Actually, if you look at our ordinance, we don't mention fraternities and sororities, we talk about Class B multiple family dwellings. So that could be co-ops, it could be other housing situations. If we want to speak in hindsight, the information that would have been helpful to me at the beginning, I didn't have. So I think beefing up that particular section. So I could see a text amendment where we work to craft maybe a specific application that would ask the information. Well, certainly first add those to our ordinance, because we have to add
those two specific entities.
Yeah, right. So things like identifying the chapter, the total number of members, where they currently live, what events are being held, number of attendees at those types of events, doubling down on parking and additional details and clarifications on where people are parking, maybe even who in the home. I'm certainly not making any promises right now. I'm just kind of thinking in terms of owning vehicles or where those vehicles are located right now. Check to ensure that they're properly registered with MSU. Right now, we're relying on really kind of the applicant in a narrative to provide all that information. Certainly now, with eyes kind of wide open as to this process, those are the things that we could add to our ordinance through the text amendment process to ensure that you all have the information that you need and that we have this as we vet these. So as they go to the planning commission, as they come to council, all that information is established up front. And I feel like what has happened in the last couple of proposals that we've learned some of those things along the way, and certainly you kind of saw what the result of that was. The last time where we had a public hearing, applicant cancel at the last minute, and that was really due to some communication issues that we weren't aware of at the beginning of the process. So that's how I could see this manifesting, rather than a moratorium, as our friends at MSU mentioned. We do not currently have any applications in the pipeline. So there's no public hearing scheduled for at least, given the notification requirements, at least the next month or two. So I have not talked to anyone that's coming along.
There's sort of a natural moratorium.
There's a natural
happening.
break at this point where if we were to come back to you, if you decide to go this way, if we were to come back with you to some potential changes that could be done via the text amendment process, I think that would be valuable.
I would be in favor of that.
If there's no more questions, I'll put a bow on it. I just want to kind of lead what the city manager was saying. Yeah, I do thank you guys in the team from Michigan State from coming out and sharing with us. We talked with Sue quite. You're up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. You don't need permission.
Thank you. I'll be brief.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did want to have an opportunity to kind of say and to clarify, and in my work here with the city over the last 25 years, I have found myself in this predicament of working with the university with off-campus issues, and kind of the fraternity sorority life has been the top issue, I would say, my entire tenure here and in my varying roles within our department. I have been reaching out to MSU all this time. I've experienced huge frustration over the years, which my current partners here can attest to. They have been on the receiving end of some of my frustrations over the years. One of the things for me, and this is not to say whether the moratorium would be a good or a bad idea, is, and I'm not even speaking to, is the second year live on good or bad, but more to kind of what some of this conversation has been about is with the fraternity and sorority life, our work together with the university and what that means to us as a community. I receive questions from residents all the time, complaints, and I do everything I can to try and partner everyone together to find a better result if possible. I can tell you as a staff person, suddenly I feel like there's like this little crack of light. It's a little green Spartan light coming from across the street. So I am very happy that we have kind of made some progress in this direction. And I do think that we'll have bumps in the road. I don't think it will always be perfect, but I think that we have a group of people that are trying their very best to kind of make improvements in this way. I've been sending these notifications over to them by our housing ordinance. I have to notify the property manager and or owner of properties whenever there is one of these party related tickets, not even talking about fraternities or sororities, within 10 days of when they're issued. And that is something that I started and worked really with our police department 25 years ago. And so now that I've all this time been spending the energy in doing this, now there will be somebody on the other end that is at least trying to form a way to partner with us in doing something with them. So I just wanted an opportunity to kind of share some of my historical experience and background in what I see this potentially can mean for us all as a community. Again, it's not going to be easy or perfect, and we won't have all the answers, but I think that we're heading in a good direction.
I think that's called burying the lead. I would be mad that you didn't go first. That might have saved them a lot of headaches. But thank you, and thank you for the partnership. And obviously, we talked with Sue and everyone over there quite a bit, so I didn't want to give a depiction that we were not communicating this and that. And it also triggered me to respond to staff and anyone else. We apologize when we put out policies and things that create unintended consequences as well. I know it's just part of the job, so I'm thinking about a few right now. So thank you for your work that you do, and once we do something and trigger it on you guys.
Can I say one thing? I don't know what the relationship between council and staff has been traditionally, and I know obviously that Mr. Lahanis is our human shield, I guess. But if we do stupid stuff, please tell us about it. You can slide an anonymous note under my door and just be like, that was super dumb, and then we can undo it. But like, I all of the staff that work with us, I respect your intelligence and professionalism, and obviously the training that you have that we don't. And so, at least with me as a council member, I don't know what the rest of the council feels like, but I would rather have frank communication on what your training and expertise has informed you would be a great path. And then at least I have all of the information to work with. So never be shy about letting me know if there's something that we could be doing better. And if you want to go through George, that's fine, but you can also just call me.
Wow, because Menser and Fehrenbach and Connolly and the chief tell me within 24 hours I'm an idiot. They don't even pass me notes. So I guess the honeymoon is over here,
Welcome.
They might just not have my number, George.
It might be that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm easy to find, I guess.
Or George is afraid of me yelling and he won't tell me.
Order. All right. Next up,
Are we putting this on the agenda for next week for council, or do we,
The moratorium.
moratorium?
I would rather see it come back I liked Mr. Minster's idea of a text amendment. It sounds like we don't have a huge time pressure, but that's my preference.
I'd say that along with maybe some legal review of what sticks and carrots we do have along the way. That sounds like what people were asking for, correct? Yeah. I'd be content with that.
Bump it down the line if any other council member doesn't agree.
All right. We're ready? All right. Next up for discussion, decriminalizing psychedelics, item 6.2.
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. So last year, it was actually April, people that were on council might recall, we received a number of calls and communications from people asking us to take a different look at how psychedelics are classified and about decriminalizing them. And so first, to begin the conversation, I wanted to be clear about what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. And so I did say psychedelics, but I have also learned that that term is kind of not the best term to use for what the aim is. And so what it's typically referred to as is this is why I don't say it, entheogens. Thank you. Entheogens. And we are talking about things that come from the earth. So things that are grown or fungi from the earth. So we're talking about decriminalization. We're not talking about legalization. So the ask is to think about people who are using, and if the criminal law is placed on these people and what that means. And from what that means to our taxpayers, as far as the time goes, the money and the arrests, but also are entheogens in the right classification? Another thing I want to mention is, please correct me if I'm wrong, they are classified as a Schedule 1 drug. Your Schedule 1 drugs are seen as drugs that have no medicinal purposes. But we see going centuries back that people have used these types of plants and fungi for spiritual reasons, for religious reasons, for healing reasons. So that's where I'm gonna begin the conversation. I can keep talking too.
No? Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'd say in general, I'm always in support of decriminalizing things that are frivolous, and some of the stuff's frivolous. My really only reservation would be around, what that represents, maybe to law enforcement or those types of things, either positive or negative. Is it something that they're spending time wasting around, chasing around that's not necessary, or they'd prefer not to? Does this create other things that were unintended consequences that we're not considering? I consider most of these types of things pretty low risk. And obviously we've seen the dangers of prescription drugs and that type of thing. And that's kind of the root of a lot of what they're dealing with now. Had very little to do with any of this type of stuff. It was more prescription drugs or even alcohol, and why they're classified, where they're classified. We don't want to have a history class, but we know there's a lot of different reasons around class and other reasons why we're even sitting here having this conversation. So I think there's something here to talk about, and I'm open to hearing more about it.
So speaking of charges, something I wanted to add in my research, I learned, so typically when a person is charged, it goes to the county prosecutor. And our Ingham County prosecutor, Seaman, along with Prosecutor Hughes, has been quoted on the number of times that these charges have gone through, and it's very minimal. I can go back to what I found out, but it was like 9 charges in, 10 years, and then no notice of charges based on this type of use in the past like 3 or 4 years. So this is about also taking something off the books, considering taking something off the books that should no longer be on the books because there's proof out there that's telling us otherwise. And there's other cities that have seen that too, like Ann Arbor and Hazel Park. And I think, Ann Arbor and Hazel Park.
So the thing is, it's not a crime on the City of East Lansing's books. And I'll show you. So it's a Schedule I drug, which means it's a federal offense. Most federal crimes are Title 18, drug offenses are Title 21. So you can be charged federally for the violation of Title 21. You will be arrested by federal authorities, be tried in federal courts. So we'll just put this aside for a minute. The highlighters came out. So when East Lansing police arrest someone, there is a bubble of items that are City of East Lansing offenses, but the rest are State of Michigan offenses. So we have carved out this little bubble of Section 750, and that's the general criminal code. The City of East Lansing does not prosecute drug offenses, okay? Those go up to the county prosecutor. So I would say that the best placed advocacy for this would be at the state legislature or the federal government, and I realize those are going to be tough places to go, but they're the ones who actually created the laws that make these illegal, or declare them Schedule I drugs. So I will tell you, speaking of unintended consequences, between 5 and 10 years ago, the City of Lansing, the amount of talking I do is this building. Anyway, between 5 and 10 years ago, the City of Lansing announced that it was, word on the street was that marijuana was going to be legal, recreational marijuana would be legal in the City of Lansing. What the City Council did there, was the council agreed to not pass a resolution making recreational marijuana illegal in the city. Now, the city had never, the police would enforce the law, but the criminal charges always came from the prosecutor's office because, like us, when they took that little bite of city prosecuted crimes, they did not include the drug crimes. Word on the street, though, was that marijuana had been decriminalized in Lansing, and particularly sort of turned into marijuana is legal in Lansing. What happened was I had clients, and I had one young man in particular, I had to say, no, guy, it's not legal in Lansing. The city of Lansing never issued charges. And so I had a handful of young folks who thought it was legal when in fact it wasn't, and they were facing the same charges. And, I did what I could to get past it, tap dance, try to explain that it was a misunderstanding. The judges weren't very receptive, one judge in particular. And so there's an unintended consequence of this. However, advocacy at the state and national levels may be very well placed. I mean, I just say that because based on my experience as a public defender and knowing that we don't actually prosecute these, so that's all.
Question for Mr. Lahanas. The city of East Lansing did actually decriminalize marijuana ahead of state legalization.
So what we said was, and maybe Captain Connolly can speak about that, but we made it a civil infraction at $25, civil infraction for a certain amount, right? So if you had above that amount, you could still be charged under the state, if you could address that.
I'm getting a lot of walking in today, Captain Connolly, thank you.
Yeah, so when the marijuana thing started to change a handful of years back, what the city did was take it from a misdemeanor, which was one of the only misdemeanor drug crimes the city could prosecute back in the day, and change it to a civil infraction. Now, there were some caveats to that. There were certain rules that were put on it, like you could have a small amount on your own property, you couldn't be smoking in public, couldn't be walking down the sidewalk, couldn't do it in an open area, generally open to the public. As this whole thing has migrated into medical marijuana and now recreational marijuana, a lot of that stuff has just become no longer something we deal with because of the changes. I would agree with Councilperson Babcock in the fact that these are things that are really out of our purview as a law enforcement to say, where it resides. It resides at the state level and it resides at the federal level. There's no city ordinance to deal with these Schedule I narcotics at all that we have on the books. Some of the things that we do see with these types of substances is rarely do we see an individual case of a small amount of mushrooms or a small amount of peyote, things of those natures, some of those natural things grown by nature that we deal with. What we do see quite often is a combination of these things with other illicit narcotics. And we did some research just in the last 24 hours, and this isn't inclusive of all the things we dealt with, but in the last 5 to 6 years, we actually found 2 cases where we dealt with death investigations, dealing not only with some of these substances, but with other substances in combination. And what we tend to find is, and not always, this isn't exclusive, but what we find is sometimes when you find these things, you do find other narcotics. Now, to determine what actually caused that death, that's way past my skill level, my knowledge. That's what we have medical examiners for and things of that nature. But to say that we've never dealt with these issues would be inaccurate. And we have dealt with them in some very serious cases. One case where there was possession with intent to deliver, causing death to an individual that we investigated. Mushrooms were involved with that, along with other prescription pills, like you spoke about, other Schedule I narcotics, cocaine, steroids, things of that nature. We tend to see a cocktail being part of the issue in some of these cases.
Can I ask? I always say I'm not going to speak in these meetings, and then I talk more than anybody else, and whatever. Someday I'll go on vacation. You guys can have a really short meeting. If you came across an individual who seemed maybe, I don't know, they're in the wrong place to the extent that you would have some contact with them, I don't know what would bring that on, and you found in their possession a Ziploc bag with like 3 ounces of mushrooms in it, what would the East Lansing police reaction to that be? I know there's a lot of variables in there that are not, but just kind of paint a little picture for me.
A lot of what ifs there. Depending on the totality of circumstances, ideally what should happen, those narcotics should be seized because it is a felony, depending on the amount you have, the way it's packaged, things like that. Right. Sometimes simple possession could be a high misdemeanor, a 1-year type violation. And those items, whatever they may be, should be brought to the station, processed for destruction, and then formal charges sought on that individual for possessing them. Okay. What happens from there is out of our purview. That's where it goes to prosecutor or a federal prosecutor, and they make those determinations.
So would something like, and I'm not obviously not talking about the times where we're talking about more serious narcotics, or in quantities that would signal intent to distribute.
Correct.
But would we have the option of doing what we did with pot, where we brought it down to a civil infraction as opposed to a misdemeanor? Or we can't do that because of the state?
So we need to do that because as Kevin referenced, that was a misdemeanor, and so it fell within our ordinances. And what these do, and what all the other communities that we referenced, Detroit and Hazel Park and Ann Arbor did, is they can't change the state laws. We can't change the state laws. And so their resolutions essentially function as like an administrative directive to the ELPD to not move forward with that one piece that we referenced. So if our guys do come in, if our officers come into contact with someone that does have them, it says that's the lowest grade investigation priority, and kind of urges them to not go forward with the testing and passing it on, drafting the warrant that then gets reviewed by state or county prosecutors.
Okay.
There would still be a workload involved with that if that was to happen, though, because what we can't do is let people continue on with that illegal substance. We'd still have to seize it, take it, document everything it did. So there will still be an extensive amount of time taken up on behalf of the LPD to assure that we're not just turning a blind eye to a violation of the law.
Just metaphorically, you're saying you can't just pour out your beer and say go home.
Correct, sir.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, what's the, this is probably really difficult to ferret out. How often do you encounter, I don't know the word they were using, but the psychedelics or that kind of thing? Is that something? I'm not even sure.
So
I support it.
One of the major failures of police work is we were never designed as like a complete information tracking system.
Sure.
So like often when we take a police report, if we run into a psychedelic, it's classified as a hallucinogen. Every report doesn't say exactly what it was. Now, with a lot of digging and things like that, we have the ability to discern that information. In the time we had, like I said, Lieutenant Fry, I'll give him credit. I put him to work on this yesterday. Was able to find these 5 or 6 cases in the last 6 years. I would share some anecdotal evidence, which I know isn't always the best. It's not academic research. But some of the more serious encounters we've had with people when it comes to these types of substances tend to end up being extremely, for lack of a better word, at times violent. When people are on hallucinogenics, they tend to hallucinate. They don't function and ideally allow us the ability to de-escalate situations. Anecdotally, I can tell you, I know for sure there was one where a naked man tried to crawl through a doggy door on a house on Hillside. It ended up being extreme. Unfortunately, a serious use of force we had to have. We had to tase the subject, took multiple officers to subdue him. It was very traumatic for that family having that subject trying to get into that house. Now, full disclosure, are there often a lot of other variables at play? Yes, like I talked about. It's not always just one of these natural grown substances. It's that with marijuana, or that with alcohol, or that with other things. But in my experience, in my 24 years, some of the more serious things we've seen with individuals when they have these hallucinogenics on board do become extremely scary for us. And, obviously we're in a situation where our first goal is to de-escalate people, try to work things out through communication, things that we work very hard to do. Sometimes these substances don't allow us the ability to do that.
I think even the advocates were speaking on, obviously having safe places and spaces, right, and partnership, supervision, that whole thing. And that seems like a real important variable as far as not having people maybe moving freely who are having difficulty or challenges, or was described as a bad trip in the conversation.
Yeah, one of the major side effects is failure to regulate body temperature. Oftentimes when we get calls of people running around nude in our city, it's usually related back to these types of substances.
So some great visuals.
Yep.
But you can't confirm what the drug was that the person was on?
Not in every one of these cases, no. Some we can. Some, by the time they do toxicology on it, especially with mushrooms and peyote, they can test for that up to about, I think, 72 hours. And when people have voluntarily told us what they were on or they've done that test, some have been confirmed that they are on those substances.
Yeah.
It would take a lot more research on our part to definitively say this case that, but these are some of the things that we have dealt with.
Yeah, I'm hoping not to group everything together because again, this discussion is about plant grown and fungi. A person who misuses Ambien can get themselves in a lot of trouble.
Absolutely.
A person that drinks too much definitely gets themselves in a lot of trouble. And so, again, my argument is also coming from the harm reduction that is done when people are able to use. That's just what I want to say about that. Oh, and I had my thing pulled up on Ingham County Prosecutor. And so what I sent was, Prosecutor Seaman and Hughes said approximately 9 cases involving shroom use or the psilocybin have been made in the last 9 years, none in the last 4. And so also, like, if you all are saying that on a criminal level, this isn't part of the city's thing, it's hard to not think about a resolution to decriminalize within the city and get the pushback, because it sounds like it's something that goes to the Ingham County or the county prosecutor anyway. And I mean, they were able to provide that information. So I'm thinking that, especially if it's a death investigation, that there has to be more information on what the drug was. But again, you can have too many Red Bulls and you have a poor outcome. And there's always, at some point, there's that possibility of a poor outcome. And some people talked about percentages of people who benefited from this type of use. And so that's what I'm thinking about as I propose this or ask council to think about a resolution to decriminalize.
How do you decriminalize something that's not against the law in East Lansing? That's what I'm not understanding based on what you've heard tonight. It's not against the law in East Lansing by East Lansing ordinances. I think I defer to council, but I don't think that we can decriminalize a federal or state law on our own. I don't think so. But
yeah, and that's the distinction that some of the council members have referenced, being decriminalization versus legalization. We can't legalize it because we can't change the state laws that make it illegal, but the term decriminalizing attempts to say that we aren't going to move forward with the process of charging it through our police department.
Okay, so we would then be instructing our police department to not enforce state law and refer it to the prosecutor, even though what we've heard tonight indicates that the prosecutor hasn't really been doing much prosecution of this, which is not a big surprise to me right now anyway. But so the reality is, so let me just ask you a question, counsel. So now we take in a substance, and I assume what happens on these substances, you ultimately send them to the state police lab to have tested? And what's the backup time on that now? 3 months, if you're lucky?
Even longer at this point,
Okay.
depending on what the substance is.
So I assume that we have so are we putting our police in a situation where they're violating the law, the federal and state law, if they don't send the substance to the state police lab to get tested?
I mean, I think that's questionable in that they have a lot of discretion in what they perform, but this is a directive from the council, what is envisioned here, to direct them administratively to say that's a low priority in the scheme of the crimes that they investigate.
Okay, no matter what the amount, and no matter what the circumstances upon which they encountered these substances.
So it's done by, or it was done by resolution in Lincoln Park and Detroit, or I'm sorry, Hazel Park and Detroit and Ann Arbor. And so that would be what would have to be put within the resolution if we were directed to draft it for the council's review.
Well, and the other thing that's in that, I think it's the Hazel Park resolution, is they have the classic, and if any of this is against the law, we don't do it. Isn't that right? Which is kind of a
Exactly
cop-out,
right.
isn't it, on that one?
That's exactly what it says.
Yeah, okay, that's right.
One more hypothetical before you leave the podium, Mr. Connolly.
I was trying.
I know. I saw the glint in your eye. You thought you could get away. The one, it just occurs to me that in the instances where there's an individual that's heavily impaired and acting, badly, like trying to break into somebody's house, there are other serious crimes that they can be charged with outside of the possession of psilocybin.
Absolutely,
Okay.
depending on the situation.
Okay.
If they're trying to forcibly enter someone's house, there's another crime there. So that is another option. However, once again, that's something that we do a full report. We send it to the prosecutor and let them determine what they want to issue charges on.
Okay, thank you. Run while you can.
Yeah, I'd say ultimately my thought process around this is kind of with Councilperson Babcock. As far as decriminalization, I do think many elements of clear of the war on drugs and a lot of parts of this whole drug thing are, once again, they're framed in a way to do what they do, and they do what they do well. But what I would not desire is to put someone in a position to not understand the law or feel a certain right of way, or as they're moving through different jurisdictions and things like that, if they have drugs on them. I was in East Lansing, and you're not in East Lansing anymore, which is very easy to do in this area. That'd be my concern of exposing you to something that ends up being almost a little bit performative in nature, and then we expose you to the very thing we're trying not to, which is law enforcement in that way. That'd be my only concern, and that's the darkest, what Councilperson Babcock's describing as the very worst case scenario, and I could really see how that happens, would be the main reason I'd be for decriminalization, is to protect individuals from petty enforcement and things like that. But I can just see where you would be trying to defend yourself, and we put you in a position of thinking you're a little more secure in this. I think there's a bigger conversation to be had on this, and this may not get you to where you want to land on this issue. And I'm always anti-performative in nature if we can't get you to a real solution. But that's just where I stand on it. But I understand, actually.
Okay. Well, I do want to say that if I was at the table when we were discussing decriminalizing marijuana, I would have still voted for a resolution to decriminalize cannabis use. My concern is people are using, and people are using in a way that's helpful to their lives and has changed their lives in positive ways. And so my concern is people that are functioning well in society know how to find the people they need to find to support them in these types of journeys, that they get prosecuted unnecessarily for their use. Meanwhile, prescriptions are legal. Alcohol, you can go ahead and buy, but you can't use, which the use typically doesn't happen on a regular basis as alcohol use or as prescription use, but you have to have that fear, even though it's something that does help you.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is not lost on me. Particularly, we live in a city at times that could be sponsored by an alcohol person, just fill in the blank. So the hypocrisy is clear and plain. I think my only, frankly, is just to not divert anyone into an unintended consequence. And I could see how quickly that could happen. I see the points of reference, and that makes total sense. But this is in a lot of areas, this would be generally performative, and even the nature, as pointed out by Councilperson Brookover, even written into Hazel Park, that some of that just went through the entire process just to say this is performative unless it's against the law, yada, yada, which most people aren't going to read. They're going to do, people will start to act on this as if they have carte blanche, and then we've set them up for failure, which would be my concern and with that, because it is essentially performative. But I get your point. And,
as a courtesy to Councilperson Watson, let's move along. So my suggestion is we authorize the city attorney to draft a resolution, and then we bring it back and we'll either vote it up or vote it down.
Fair.
That would just be my suggestion procedurally at this point.
Yep.
I'm in support of that. Sounds good.
City Manager?
Oh, just we'll go for the next one.
Oh, yeah. Item 6.3, discussion of city ordinance regarding parking ticket fees.
So in the interest of time for our two closed sessions, which are very important, I would like to defer this item to next week. If council will give me a motion for that, I appreciate it.
So moved.
Second.
All in, just this one, or we're going to move to
Just this-
6.4
just this one.
next? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 6.4, discussion of letter of intent from Convexity Properties LLC regarding transfer of 341 Evergreen Avenue.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I will try to be brief and truncate the 20-some years of this project into just a few minutes here. So if you could just go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to give you a real brief background of a lot of stuff that has happened, and then get to the letter of intent from the developer, and then ultimately a question for the council and discussion. So next slide, if you want to just orient yourself to the property, I think we all know it well. There's actually two properties. Parcels A and C are on the bottom part of the screen, and parcel A and D are in the bottom part, and parcel C is the one to the north. Go ahead, next slide. This started really in 2004 with a developer acquiring the Citizens Bank building. They subsequently vacated that year. You can go ahead to the next slide. In 2008, that developer then acquired what would become parcel C on the left, and then parcel D on the left, and then parcel C, the old Evergreen Arms building on the right there. Go ahead to the next slide. In 2008, the Planning Commission approved or recommended approval of a site plan for the project that they had in mind at that time. Go ahead, next slide. The DDA then subsequently exercised their options to purchase 4 parcels containing 5 buildings on Evergreen. And then next slide. Then there's basically things did not progress for many years. Ultimately, that project did not come to fruition, and then other project attempts for the next 5 years did not also come to fruition.
That graphic is very illustrative of the entire process.
Go ahead with the next slide, which brings us to the approved project from 2018. DRW, Convexity, they have many names. We'll just call them Convexity tonight. They essentially got this project approved in 2 phases. Go ahead with the next slide. Phase 1 being the mixed-use building, the Abbott, as well as the hotel, the Graduate, and public infrastructure, which would realign Albert Avenue across Abbott and upgrade in a significant way the water and sewer, as well as the street infrastructure, sidewalks, bike lanes, et cetera. That public infrastructure was the subject of a brownfield TIF, which was approved by the city, ultimately inclusive of $5.9 million of eligible activities, plus interest. Again, the lion's share of it would be the public infrastructure, but there was also demolition, asbestos abatement, and some other site costs related in that 5.9. It should be noted that the original expected duration of the plan was 9 years, and due to most critically the valuation of the project after it was complete, that timeline has been significantly shortened, I guess is the word. So go ahead with the next slide. And you can see that is phase one, buildings A and D have been put in the ground and they are in operation. Which brings us to phase two. Phase two includes the building that is satisfying the city's 25% housing diversity requirement. It has 74 units of LMI that are planned at the site. It also has 25 units of market rate rental. According to our approved development agreement, it must be occupied by 2025. The development agreement says January. There was an enforced delay, so I think we're looking at March of 2025. And if that does not happen, the land transfers to the city of East Lansing. However, with the transfer, there's a deed restriction restricting the city's use of the property in perpetuity for public open space. Further, if that transfer occurs and the deed restriction is in place, it would also satisfy the housing diversity requirement per the development agreement. So here is the site of Building C. I think this photo is just a few months old, so it's pretty much up to date here. You can see, it's been demolished. The city's infrastructure project up Evergreen has turned that into from a roadway to a street and pedestrian, or a pedestrian and bike connection, and that kind of gray or brown area is also part of the city's property. And then next slide, you can see the rendering of the approved building there. Convexity throughout the project period was very adamant that they were moving forward with building C. However, recently that has changed due to the economic factors that I think we're all familiar with. They've decided that and have indicated that they are not moving forward with building C. Therefore, they have had conversations with staff leading to this letter of intent that's the subject of our discussion tonight. Essentially, their offer is, because they're not moving forward with building C, they have offered to transfer the land to the city now and remove any requirement for the deed restriction. Further, they would transfer to the city all of their plans, including the architectural plans for building C, and allow us to move forward with those plans should we desire to do so, under the condition that we work with through a separate agreement with the architect that made those plans. In exchange, they would expect the city to amend our development agreement to effectuate the transfer, and also to accelerate the satisfaction of the housing diversity requirement that is currently approved in that development. Further, to provide compensation, they are proposing that we amend the approved brownfield plan to include 1.56 million of additional eligible expenses, which they certainly have in terms of brownfield eligible activities, plus interest. And would add no more than 1 year to the plan. So just a little background, I think, on how that number was derived. And I think if you talk to Convexity, they would say they had a lot more than $200,000 of additional consideration, especially if you look at the additional eligible expenses. But that aside, just kind of give you a little breakdown. The land could be valued at approximately 1.3 million, just based on the appraisal that the city performed on our parking lot number 4, and then taking that on a square foot basis to parcel C. Additional consideration for the demolition of the buildings, the due diligence they provided on the property, the architectural plans, et cetera, could be valued at $200,000. And then the city actually is on the hook currently for $60,000 to Convexity based on a preferred traffic signal redesign option. And so that would also be included in there. They have indicated that this is really this is it. It's a yes or no binary question. So that is part of the discussion tonight. I just put some pros and cons. It's certainly not an exhaustive list for your consideration. Certainly the pros being that, without the deed restriction, have the city having that property would really allow for us to plan for a variety of uses, give us flexibility. It would allow the city to take the reins on actually moving forward with low to moderate income housing in the area. Of course, the architectural plans could be helpful if we decided to just move forward with that building. The parcel could, however, add additional flexibility for really this visioning we've been discussing regarding the Park District planning area or the remaining parcels. So it really could kind of reset the decks on that conversation and phase two as we're looking at that project. The fact that it would be expenses included into the amended brownfield plan would not expose the general fund and in fact would leverage other millages outside of the cities. And further, the brownfield plan would still end quite a bit earlier than the originally expected duration. Certainly some cons as well. First and foremost, additional taxpayer expenses for those eligible activities. There'd be additional time on the brownfield plan, which is currently expected to end after, I think, tax year 2023. And it eliminates, the possibility, I guess, that the developer could or would decide at some point to move forward with Building C prior to March of 25 when it would transfer to us. So really the big question for you tonight is, should we move forward with this LOI? And it's, again, a question that ultimately would lead to a number of processes. It's going to involve the Brownfield Authority and the Downtown Development Authority, for instance, for both the development agreement and the Brownfield plan. And we would move forward to bring this back to you for consideration next week and start that process. So that's the end of I don't think I was that brief.
Well summarized, Mr. Fehrenbach.
Just so realistically, on the future development on this person, someone would be starting over again, basically on the 25% rule. So they need more floors to make this practical, correct? We're kind of starting, no one's going to build the affordable housing without gobbling up the other types of housing, correct? That's usually what they're after is the market rate housing in combination with the 25% affordable housing. So we'd be that's what we'd be marketing back out to the public for our property, correct? If we wanted to go that direction? Not necessarily. I mean, I think the city having site control changes our potential course of action. And we could, for instance, decide to partner with a developer that's only going to do LMI and do a LIHTC project where we maybe bring our consideration is the property, and so it changes the economics. Or what I might advocate for is taking a broader look at the entirety of what's left, basically adding this into what is envisioned as phase 2 of this Park District planning effort, where originally we were going to look at just the public spaces. Right now, we're focused on what we're calling phase 1, which is trying to get this grant from the MEDC to bring enhancements to the farmers market, as well as activating the Board of Water and Light substation building that was moved into Valley Court Park, and then making some connectivity from the park to downtown. This phase 2 that I would envision would really kind of engage the public in a planning effort. Now we'd also be including, this property as part of that, and potentially could add, the city moving forward in driving development of housing, as well as other uses down there. Let me do my math straight. Worst case scenario, we're acquiring 1.3 million in land for 1.56 million at a cost of the 60K would be what would be applied direct to the taxpayer, or just the extension of the brownfield is the penalty? Is that the only area? Is that that's the valuation on the property alone?
I think maybe the maybe the question you're asking is, what's the net cost to the city for this land? Is that
So the net cost would be one additional year of brownfield TIF as part of the plan, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, the way that would work is that they would transfer the city to us as part of an amendment to the development agreement that envisioned additional eligible expenses being pulled from their project. So they have expenses that are eligible under the state act that we negotiated as a city as not including into the original, well, not the original, but the amended brownfield plan number 11. So the net cost is the opportunity cost of a year of revenue. However, I probably should note that this property, the property that we're pulling the tax increment financing from, properties A and D, parcels A and D, those are in the downtown development's TIF 2 district. So when this brownfield plan ends, that TIF district will go back into effect, essentially. So.
But one of the advantages for the city is because it's a brownfield TIF and it's capturing more than just the city taxes, it really is only about a third of the city's actual millage, right? The rest of it comes from the other sources. So it does give the city more buying power, I guess you could say, right?
Correct.
So the net would be 1/3 ballpark?
Except that I think what Mr. Fehrenbach just said is it's never going to come to the general fund. Even after the brownfield TIF expires, it's going to go to the DDA's budget. So the taxpayers are not ever going to benefit from that expired TIF other than having an additional budget within the DDA's budget, which will be spent downtown, et cetera. So it's kind of, I don't know, like it's hard to make an exact dollar amount that would be our liability because it's not ever going to come into our general fund.
George?
Yeah, so it's an unusual situation because it already is in the TIF. It's the TIF 2 district, is it the large TIF district of the entire downtown? So Mayor Pro Tem is correct that because it's in the TIF 2 district, once this TIF stops collecting for this purpose, it just goes back to the DDA. But the city still does get an advantage in terms of its overall buying power because we were only a third of the mills, about a third of the value of the project, of the tax capture. So there is an advantage to the city, obviously, in using these brownfields because we're capturing all the mills, city mills and other mills. So there is an advantage. And obviously, if the TIF capture goes to the DDA, the city, it's a component unit, but the city doesn't directly control the DDA, so those mills go to the DDA. Here, the mills stay with the city for this purpose to be able to purchase property that we can use. So I do think it is a significant advantage.
Otherwise, if I'm reading correctly, in perpetuity, it locks into a public open space. Legally, in perpetuity is forever.
Yeah.
Just looking at my lawyer. So it's not a real good options here. I think you're being real amicable. So it locks permanently as a open space forever, or we take action.
I mean, parks are great, but I think we're all also pretty invested in the idea of having moderate income housing somewhere in the vicinity of Valley Court Park. And if we take the open space option, then we lose that.
No, I get it.
And is this a potential site for an art space?
Yeah, I think not just this site, but if we look at the broader area and really be thoughtful, we might find that there's uses that are better aligned with various areas if this site opens up and becomes under the city's control. I think it changes the game in a way.
What was the last time this was appraised?
It was not appraised from under the city's auspices. We had performed an appraisal of parking lot number 4, which is the corner building where Michigan State Federal Credit Union is developing. And that was in, I believe, November of 2019.
Okay, but don't we have an obligation? So in effect, we're buying this back from these people, correct? Don't we have an obligation to have an appraisal, number 1, and number 2? Because of the way this, I'm not saying I'm not in favor of this, don't get me wrong, but because of the way this is working, and maybe council's going to have to answer this for us, not tonight, but can we do this without a vote of the people, or is there a charter prohibition on this or anything like that?
don't think there's a vote of the people that's necessary, but we'll definitely, there's a lot of documents that it discusses. The letter of intent is really intended as a general understanding that the parties are interested in moving forward, and then we start the negotiation process.
Which gets me my last question. What's the time parameter? Is there some drop dead date on their part?
They technically put within this document, it has to be done within 5 business days. We're not going to do that because we're not asking for action tonight, but there's been cooperation between the parties. This is a long process with tens of millions of dollars involved. I don't think they're going to walk away.
Well, so the letter of intent, they want that done within 5 days of some date, but the reality is all that is a letter of intent. The culmination of all the documents. There's not some date like, May 30th or something where they're saying everything has to be done by then.
That's correct.
There is an expiration date within the development agreement as it was written.
Right.
March of 25, I think is so just to maybe provide some context from my conversations, the 1.3 million that we provided as sort of a litmus test based on the Lot 4 appraisal was really just to establish whether we are in the ballpark. The $1.56 million is really just a number, and it's a number that they've indicated as their last, best, and final. Based on the conversations that staff had with the developer, I can tell you they wanted quite a bit more, but we felt that this might be a reasonable amount, especially if it includes the 60,000 that.
Yeah, I don't dispute that, but the reality is at some point we have to justify to the taxpayers what we're doing, and if I go out and buy a car, I'd like to know what the price is going to be or what the appraised value is going to be. That's all. We have to explain it to somebody sometime.
So I think,
especially after we got that arrow going down, on that thing you showed. I don't want us to be the continuation of that arrow going down.
I think we're the continuation is stopping that from, I think too, it would be around comps, and you'd have to look at, obviously, when we sacrifice lot 4, this lot went up. So if you're even doing the math from lot 4, because we don't have that many comps, or that we're land poor. So, in a way, you can pencil this out, and the appraisal's good, but I can pencil it out to either have nothing or raw land or an opportunity to build ever again on this site, it seems.
I think there's what it's worth, but there's also what it's worth to us.
Yep.
And the other thing is that the developer says they've had a significant cost in acquiring this property back in, I forget the year, I don't know if it's a public price that they have, but they've put in significant price in acquiring the property for the development. So they're looking to recoup a portion of their loss cost.
Yeah, just to add, the transfer of the property would be like for $1. The question here for the council is whether to, for that exchange kind of additional eligible activities that we had already negotiated out of the brownfield deal. So I guess if that adds any context for you.
Yeah. All right, Mayor, so that's what we want to try to figure out tonight, since the body is, I love y'all, but we've been here a long time and we got other stuff to do. So the idea of presenting this, Mr. City Manager, was does the council want to go ahead with something on the
next Tuesday
for next week? So I'm in favor of that.
So my.
Thank you.
Any more questions and comments?
Fehrenbach, you don't have to slip me the note under my door tomorrow. You can just go ahead and call me.
Just clarifying, so.
Yeah, I'll put in the.
I move we enter closed session for strategy and negotiation sessions connected with the negotiation of collective bargaining agreements at the request of the city pursuant to MCL 15.268C. That's my first motion.
Bring them together.
I don't think we.
Bring them together.
Do you want them together?
Yeah, we can do them as a joint motion for one.
Okay, and then I also move to enter a closed session to consult with the city's litigation counsel regarding trial or settlement strategy in connection with pending litigation in Hios versus City of East Lansing, case number 20-199-CZ, for the reason that an open meeting would have a detrimental financial effect on the litigating or settlement position of the city.
I'll second. And we'll be going into closed session. This will be a roll call vote. And we'll only return back to this chamber to adjourn the meeting.
Councilmember Babcock?
Yes.
Councilmember Brookover?
Yes.
Councilmember Watson?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg?
Yes.
Mayor Bacon?
Yes.
Then I can always buy my budget book.
How did we lose one?
I know, but I think we gotta make a motion. George wants us to make some kind of motion. What do you want us to do, George? You have to do a motion to return to closed session.
And then we roll call?
No, I don't think we have to roll call.
Nothing?
And then you just adjourn the meeting without a motion.
Got it.
You want a motion to return to open session?
Yep.
Seconded to adjourn closed session and return to open session.
I'll move to adjourn closed session and resume open session.
Second.
Moved by me, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem.
Everybody.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.